Every single culture around the world pretty much relies on bread, and Mexico is no different. Now, when you think of Mexican breads, you typically only think of tortillas. Well, surprise, Mexico actually has many different types of breads and a very surprising and fascinating history to go along with it. Their breads are in many thanks to the Aztecs, the Spanish, the French, and surprisingly, possibly the Jewish people as well. So in this video, I'm going to be showing y'all the 5 most popular breads that Mexico has to offer. Hey y'all, welcome back to Grains and Grit. My name is Felicia, and on this channel, we talk about real whole grains, all from a biblical perspective. This is actually part 2 of a 2-part series that I am doing all about Mexico because I recently went on a vacation to Mexico for 10 days and absolutely loved it. And I kind of wanted to I was inspired and I wanted to share all the things that I learned with y'all. Now, Mexico, especially here in America, generally has a bad rap due to the immigration issue and also drug cartels and all that's involved. But we're setting aside politics and we're actually just going to be celebrating Mexico for what they're excellent at. And one of the things that they were excellent and known for is their food. We love authentic Mexican food here. But on my recent trip to Mexico, I was actually very surprised to learn about other breads that Mexico and Mexicans really love. And we're going to be diving into that in this video today. Now, the thing is with Mexican breads, it's actually very important to understand the history of Mexico in order to really appreciate and understand why they have such a variety when it comes to their breads. I'll briefly sum it up to give you a little bit of an understanding. So many thousands of years ago, Mexico, or what was known as Mesoamerica, was first populated by the Olmecs of Mesoamerica, followed by the Aztecs and Mayans, which more people are more familiar with. Now we have the Aztecs to thank, who somehow, we have no idea how, realized that whenever you soak corn in wood ash, that it makes it more malleable, and that's what gives you the ability to even make corn tortillas. Now, this process is called nixtamalization, which I've done a whole video about. I will link those for y'all below. So for a long time, for the Aztecs and many peoples of Mexico, their main grain was corn. That's why you see it in Mexico, in Central America, down even into bits of South America. Corn is their main grain, not actually wheat. And this is why corn was actually very sacred to the Aztecs and the Mayans. So that's what they were consuming for who knows how long. And then come the early 1500s, and the Spanish conquistadors, particularly Hernando Cortez, landed in Mexico in what is now known as Mexico City. Then it was called Tenochtitlan. Say that one 5 times fast. It's one thing that the Spanish did is they actually brought wheat, among other things like their pork and their cattle, to Mexico. So this is how wheat was first introduced to Mexico, was thanks to the Spaniards. Now, Spain is a Catholic country. And whenever they conquered Mexico and they started settling in, it was very important that they also established their Catholic religion. And in Catholicism, they have this very important thing called the Eucharist. And the only grain that is acceptable to be used is wheat. So here the Catholics are trying to convert the natives, but the natives who's worshipped corn, I mean, the corn was very sacred to them. They were not really wanting this wheat. But one thing the Aztecs had was chocolate, thank the Lord. And they kind of noticed people dipping bread into the hot chocolate. And basically we know that they tried it themselves and were instantly converted, which I do not blame them at all. And it's actually now a custom in Mexico to be dipping bread in hot chocolate. Now, that's the Spanish. Now fast forward to the mid-1800s, when actually the French then came and fought wars and tried to occupy Mexico. Beginning in the 17th century, French bakers were then coming over to Mexico and introducing the French baking way of baking bread to Mexico. And while the French were defeated later on in 1862, Mexicans actually really embraced the French style of baking bread and captured their love for bread baking. And we still see that today in Mexico, which was a huge surprise to me. Okay, so that was a very extremely brief history of Mexico. So now let's check out the 5 breads that Mexico is actually known for. But before we do, be sure to comment below and let me know if any of these breads you have tried, if you've tried to make them, which one is your favorite. I would love to hear about it below in the comments. So first up, I know, big shocker, is corn tortillas. Now, corn tortillas obviously is probably the most popular and most known bread that Mexico has to offer because it originated from there. There's a reason. And corn tortillas you will find everywhere throughout Mexico, no matter which part of Mexico. It is a huge, huge, huge part of their cuisine. Now, corn tortillas in Mexico are not just for tacos like you think. It is used in many, many of their dishes. And if all else fails, you'll see a basket of hot, steaming, freshly made tortillas sitting on the table that you can enjoy with your meal, just like we would typically have a loaf of bread here in the United States and many Western countries. All right, number 2 bread that you will see is actually flour tortillas. Now, in the United States, and again, you may be most familiar with flour tortillas, and you may associate that Mexico does flour tortillas, but that's not actually the case. Flour tortillas are not as common in Mexico. It is only mainly common in the northern regions of Mexico, and then, of course, in every Tex-Mex dish you can find. But it actually has a very fascinating history because it's actually believed that actual flour tortillas as we know them today is possibly an invention of the Jewish people that actually were coming to Mexico, fleeing this little thing called the Spanish Inquisition. But the thing is because they were Jewish, wheat is typically considered kosher for certain feasts like the Passover feast, and not corn, which is what you find in Mexico. But yet they were also still being persecuted because of the Spanish Inquisition. And so in order to kind of hide their faith while still being able to practice it, whenever they need an unleavened type bread, they were making flour tortillas. So they look like tortillas, but they're made with the wheat that is considered to be actually kosher for Passover. So there's a little bit of controversy with that, but overall, many, many people believe that it's the Jewish population in Mexico that really took off, but they settled in northern Mexico, which is why you mainly only find flour tortillas in northern Mexico, and they are amazing. But if you travel in other parts of Mexico, you're probably not really going to find flour tortillas there. Number 3 bread is what is overall called pan dulce. Now, this is where it's important to watch part 1 of this series, of the 2-part series, where I'm actually taking y'all on a tour of a local Mexican panaderia, which is really where they're all over Mexico and where you will find a huge variety of pan dulces. And what is pan dulces? It translates to sweetbreads. It's just their sweetbreads. And it's basically just the general name for Mexican pastries. But as always, Mexicans like to put their own spin on things, which is where many of the pan dulces come from. The most popular pan dulce is called conchas, which translates to seashell. And basically this is a bread with a type of, not icing, but kind of like a icing crust type thing that is sweet. It's just a sweeter type of bread, and you've got to have it fresh. It is absolutely amazing. I made it the other day with freshly milled wheat. Y'all probably saw that on Instagram, and I need to share that with y'all because it's absolutely amazing. Now, as far as pan dulce goes, that's the most popular one, but they estimate, and this is an estimation, that there are between 500 and 2,000 different types of pan dulce in Mexico. So if you ever find yourself in Mexico, no, it's typically not made with fresh milled wheat, but they are made daily and fresh. I highly recommend going in a panaderia to find yourself some of these wonderful pan dulces. We're going to take a quick pause here before breads number 4 and 5 to talk about today's sponsor for this video, and that is 4 Generations Organic Farms. Now, no, they are not farmers in Mexico. They are actually based in Oklahoma. But if you're wanting to make many of these breads, like the conchas, I was actually using their wheat to do it, and it turned out wonderful, whether it's tortillas or the pan dulces or any of the other breads that we're going to be talking about. Now, a few things I love about 4 Generations Organic Farms is, 1, it is a family-owned business. You're buying directly from the farmer. You don't have a middleman, and you're also not supporting these large corporations. I also love, of course, that they are organic wheat berries, and they use no glyphosate or any of those nasty, harmful chemicals. They are also very diligent about taking care of their soil. And as any gardener, any farmer knows that the nutrients of the plant start in the soil. So it's very, very important that you take care of that soil. Now, if you're wanting to make pan dulce or flour tortillas, I actually recommend their hard white wheat, which is called Stardust. And if you want to check them out, just go to grainsandgrit.com/4generations and use Grains and Grit coupon code for 10% off your first order. And thank you so very much to 4 Generations Organic Farms for sponsoring this video. All right, now breads number 4. And this category is actually called pan francais. Pan francais. I think it's how you pronounce it. It's French breads. Basically, it's French breads. But specifically, there are 2 main types, and that is their bolillo bread and their telera bread, which I showed you in the panaderia in the first video. And if you were to look at these breads, you would instantly think that they were French breads, and they are. They're just made in Mexico. So first up is the bolillo, which is their most popular, I believe, or they're kind of tied, I would say. But it's basically like a baguette, just shorter, 1 slash on the top. And it's used for everything, dipping in that hot chocolate, especially for their torta ahogadas, and a dish that I never had while in Mexico, but they're molletes. I don't think I had that, and I think I pronounced that right. But those are 2 very popular dishes, especially in Guadalajara, which we were in. Now, the telera is still a French style bread, but it is flatter, softer, and rounder bread, and is also used for many different types of tortas, which is a torta is basically like their sandwiches, but also just good for eating. But those I saw everywhere as well. Fun fact, there is actually a common saying in Mexico regarding these breads, and I may botch the pronunciation, forgive me, but it is un bolillo para el susto. Which basically means if you're feeling anxious, scared, or frightened, you need to be eating a bolillo. And I'm totally on board for this. It actually became pretty popular in news stories. Became aware of this fact whenever Mexico City back in 2023 had a big earthquake, and there were women and people going out and giving bolillo bread to people, and people were just flocking to them because they very much believe this, that a bolillo will certainly calm your fears. Last but not least, birote, which, surprise, Mexicans have a sourdough bread. And this also has a great history. So basically this looks very similar to your bolillo bread. Pretty much the same shape and everything, but of course, Mexicans have a bit of a twist. Now, first of all, the history of this bread was actually named after a Belgian volunteer in the French army who was a baker who came over during the French occupation. And as a baker, his name was Camille Pirote or Piro. I'm not sure which language I'm supposed to pronounce this in. But bottom line is he was a baker, and he was told to teach the local natives how to bake French bread, but there was no yeast to be found. And so he created his own sourdough starter, and the soldiers, where they would get the fresh bread, and the locals would get the day old bread. The locals still just loved it. And after the French left, he still stayed behind and opened up a bakery in Guadalajara, which is why, like tequila is mainly grown in the Jalisco state, which is where Guadalajara is. This type of bread, birote, being the sourdough, is known as a Guadalajaran sourdough bread. But like Mexicans put a twist on many things, this is not your typical sourdough, because their sourdough starter actually has beer, lime, and sometimes egg in the actual starter, which makes this a very unique tasting sourdough bread that you can really only capture in Guadalajara. And what it's used for is also a very famous Guadalajaran dish, torta ahogadas. All right, so there you have it. So did you learn something new like I did? Again, I didn't fully know this until I was in Mexico, and I thought I had read up all about the Mexican breads, but I was really excited to learn more while I was on vacation in Mexico. Now be sure to check out part 1 for that tour of the Mexican panaderia in Guadalajara, and let me know what other international type breads that you would like to see. I'll actually create a playlist for this video to actually have all my international breads that I have done. So check that in the description box below if you want to see what other I have. But otherwise, comment below to let me know what you would like to see me make. As always, I hope you enjoyed this video and that it was informational for you. Leave your comments below. Be sure to subscribe to this channel if you haven't already. And I will see y'all next week. Bye.